So we should now be live. Yes, I see a large number of participants. Good morning, everyone. I'll just give a moment for everyone to connect. Right. Plenty of people filtering in for fairly early on a whatever morning it is, Tuesday morning. See, I'm already losing track. Okay, numbers have stabilized, so I think we can start. Good morning, everyone. My name's Owen Appleton. I'm from EGI, and I work on the Eosc Hub project and also the Eosc Enhance project, as well as having various other hats. Welcome to this session, How Can I Onboard My Service into the Eosc portal? I am your session chair, so I will do an introduction and then I will give a little talk later on. Just to make sure everyone's in the right room. I think this is the only room going in the conference this morning. This is the plenary session, so hopefully you're all here for the right reasons. Right, a little bit of housekeeping as ever. The sessions are recorded. The recording light is on, so please be aware of what you say. The recordings will be made available after the conference, which I think is very useful, especially for some of the information we're going to give today. We have chosen to make this meeting, this call, the meeting mode in Zoom, which puts a little bit more trust on all of you in that you have to stay muted, but it does mean that you can see who else is in the call and you can see the chat together, which I think is pretty useful, because I think the interactions that we get in these calls are really a lot of the value. Please ask your questions in the chat. I will try and collate the questions as we go through for some time at the end. Although if there are specific questions on each talk, we'll try and give a little bit of time after each one to just answer anything specific. Anything we don't get to, please be confident we will try and cover afterwards asynchronously. I think we would all be available by email to ask other questions. Right, so getting into the actual talk. This session is called, my computer works, How Can I Onboard My Service into the Eosc portal? Which is interesting because the first thing I'm going to do is critique the title of my own talk. Bear with me for just a second. I think this is a very reasonable title to see for the content we're going to see here presented, but there are some things that have changed in the community, and I think that these changes should be recognized as we move forward. This is really how we've described things going in the past, and now they'll change a little. The first is that I think we have to stop talking about Eosc portal. This gives people the impression that Eosc is a website. Eosc is not a website. Eosc is an ecosystem and a community. That community includes some very interesting platforms. This includes some interesting platforms, of which one is the one that's behind Eosc portal. Eosc portal is important, but it's a website. It's a view on what goes on within Eosc. When we over focus on the portal itself, we tend to have misunderstandings. So I think this is an important place to start. Also, it suggests that there is a single entry into Eosc, which, as we're going to hear from Carsten Thiel from CESDA and Shock next, is not true. There are portals for many communities. Also, I think, although it says how can I onboard my services, I would here probably substitute in resource. I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but it's when I get to my talk, I think now we've tried to broaden the idea of what are the elements we're bringing into Eosc, and certainly services are not the only thing we're bringing. There are many other important elements which we have to have in order to make Eosc work. And finally, I think onboard is a term that's been used a lot. I know some communities like it less. Connect might well be a better way of talking about it, because we're not talking about taking you people who are outside Eosc and bringing you in. There's no question that the thematic clusters are Eosc projects and we're already in Eosc. It's about connecting their resources together. This isn't some exclusive club that you're on the outside until you go through this process. It's about stitching together the existing community in a more effective way. And with that in mind, we want to announce some good news in this regard, and that's really what this session is about, which is three things really, all of which will be covered by the talks today. New Eosc provider and resource profiles. This is version 3. This is the way we within Eosc Hub and Eosc Enhance and elsewhere describe providers and their resources. So it's kind of the metadata schema. This will be presented by me briefly later. A new provider portal, which allows for self-service connecting of providers and resources, and an updated Eosc marketplace on the Eosc portal website. All of these things are progress, which I think there's been a lot of people waiting for a long time. So hopefully this will be something that goes down well with all of you. These are the talks that we will have in order to get to that point. First, we'll have Carsten Thiel from CESDA and SHOC. He'll be talking about really the top end of the pipeline. How do projects like the thematic clusters, like SHOC, go from having a whole bunch of deliverables to some idea of services which they could connect somewhere, and I think other resources as well. So I think this is a good place to start. I will then introduce the provider and resource profiles and the sort of very high level view of the onboarding process, as it's been called now, I guess, connecting process, we could call it. George Papastefanos from Eosc Enhance will talk about the provider portal and how this allows you to connect. And then lastly, Bartosz Wilk from CipherNet and Eosc Hub and Enhance will give us a view of the new upgraded marketplace. So given there's all these new things happening, there's one other kind of point I wanted to make, which is we need feedback. And if you look on the new pages within the portal, if you look on the provider portal, so this is the for providers button and everything you get to from there. If you look in the marketplace part, you will see on the right-hand side a new little button that says provide feedback. And if you click this button, you will get a feedback form. This is only a basic feedback form, but for this initial stage where we're launching quite a few things at once, we wanted to give people a direct opportunity to give feedback on things that work, that don't work, that are broken, that are missing. There's always going to be teething problems with new systems. So please, in the next couple of weeks, can you make frequent use of this button if you have something specific you want to get through to the people developing these platforms. This will really help us a lot in making sure that they meet your needs. Okay, that's the end of my initial introduction. So now I will pass over to Carsten Thiel. He's the technical director, I believe, of CESDA, and is an important player in the SHOC community as well as the larger infrastructure community. So Carsten, do you want to present your slides? I will stop sharing from my side.
Yes, thank you. Desktop 2, there we go. Yeah, so just after Owen decided to open the entire topic again, I'm going back to talking specifically about services and specifically about listing them in the portal, but I'll also explain a bit on why this is the focus of this talk and where it relates to the other things Owen just mentioned. So the SHOC project, many of you might have heard about it already, in particular yesterday. It's one of the 5 cluster projects with 48 partners, a 40-month project for 14 million euros. Quite a big project. It's the social sciences part of the European Open Science Cloud. We have SHOC as the way we're combining both the technical side, the e-infrastructures, tools, marketplace, and innovation, but also on the other side, research data, training, governance, the human aspect of it, combining all of this into the Eosc, and then building on top of this our own view on the social science and humanities researchers, that they can then access the specific services that are relevant for them. SHOC is, to some extent, a network. We have lots of different institutions in the SHOC project. It's from research institutions, e-infrastructures. We also have private companies. We're liaising with policymakers. We have civil societies. We have citizen scientists. We have a lot of researchers directly embedded also in the project through the research organizations, and now also a research initiative in its own right. Universities, of course, libraries, in particular on the training. Now, with such a big project, Some of the key numbers are that we have 101 deliverables and 49 milestones over the course of 40 months. So this is more than one milestone per month on average, although don't be fooled by the average, because a lot of these milestones are reached simultaneously, like halfway through and towards the end. The same, of course, goes for deliverables. 101 deliverables are not evenly distributed, as is the case with almost all projects. Now, deliverables, classically, we're talking a lot about reports, and we're talking about demonstrators, which in many cases is what's the official term for a software service that you're actually building. But the demonstrator or the report is just something that you deposit somewhere or publish somewhere. In our case, that's Zenodo, but it might also be other publication platform. But it's something that comes out and is a object that then resides somewhere for citation or for proof of work done. And the milestones, they're more of the steps along the project roadmaps. It's kind of the checkpoints to make sure that we are on progress, but it's also a very intangible object, or objects in that sense that we don't necessarily get immediate feedback out of reaching a milestone. We may have milestones that are upgrades of services, and this is something we can communicate and the users can see, but how that relates to onboarding to the marketplace, the Shock portal, the Eosc portal, is something we have to look into. So, as I said, some of these deliverables built towards new services or upgrading existing services. We have cases where we take services that have been developed for one of the specific infrastructures or domains and now making them available and compatible with a more broader sense for all of social sciences and humanities. We've gone through the process of defining our services and tools timeline. This is available from the Shock website. It's kind of a roadmap that shows us which services, tools, products become available at what point over the project time. And here you also see there's a large number of things happening between January 2022 and April 2022, which is only the last 4 months of the project, and the first 36 months of the project are almost as many dots in this graph. So this means we have to prepare for the fact that many things will become available only at the very end of the project. Now, I said there's deliverables, but we also need to talk about services. Tangible versus intangible. I said the deliverables are things you can deposit somewhere. Now, a PDF might not be as tangible as a physical publication in form of a book, but still you have a DAW, you can cite it, it's available. Whereas a service is more something that's continually provided to you, the additional benefit that you have from accessing a specific product maybe. And going back to the definition from Eosc Hub on what a production service for Eosc means, some of the core requirements are stable and reliable software. Within Sensda, we've worked for quite some years in defining on what we understand as a reliable software and how we measure whether something is a reliable software. You also have to provide documentation and user support to the users of your services, have some form of terms of use or even an SLA, and provide evidence that your service has users and the use is consistent with the expectation of those users and that it actually satisfies their needs. So these are things that when thinking of in terms of a project where you're writing a deliverable several months in advance saying we're going to produce a software that will allow a user to do X and Y, that's a several steps away from being able to show that there are actually users using the service to do research and that the things that the software can do actually enable the user to use the service in a way that meets the expectations. So the things we've been recently going through is identifying what are these services, because some of the things you've seen on the roadmap are in fact just some of the major deliverables. There are a lot of training materials that is just material. I say just material. Of course, there's a lot of work in producing this material, but the actual service in training is delivering the training, teaching people, not just handing out slides. So we have to define what are our services, and we have to define who are the technical and the content contacts. This is a terminology we're using within SASTA. The technical person is the one, or the technical contact is the one who's responsible for this stable, reliable software part, whereas the content person is reliable for documentation, support, ensuring that the service actually meets what the users need, which also means talking to the users, on finding users sometimes. And one of the most important problems with projects is what's going to happen to the service once the project is over. At the very lowest level, the people working for the project may not have fun or may not have their positions after the project ends. The grant may pay for the server, the software, or the service is currently running on, but this will probably end with the end of the project. So what happens after the end of the project? In particular, if we're onboarding services that become available 1 month before the end of the project, if we then have to take it back out of Eosc 1 month later, this is really not a good solution. So we're looking already now into the question of what will be the future governance for these services, who will take care of them in both the technical sense, but also taking care of the user in the user sense. And what's going to be the business model? Is it just the ERIC paying for the service and maintaining it? Or will there be a paid model in some way or another? All of the options that Eosc is also providing. And of course, now that the new portal is online, we'll start onboarding the first services, because over this summer, several first candidates have become available that we're now starting with. And the other side is how this will look to the social science researchers and humanities researchers. For this, we're building the SSH Open Marketplace. It's a discovery portal for social sciences and humanities resources. And here we go back to Owen's mention of it's not just about the services. Because for a service to be an EOS, you have to satisfy all these requirements. You have to provide support and so on. But in social science humanities, sometimes a simple Python script that's available somewhere on GitHub might still be worth mentioning. It comes with a very different level of quality and guarantees, but it's still not irrelevant. So what the SSH Marketplace will offer is a list of tools and services, also training materials, data sets, publications, and even workflows to connect all of these together. It's designed along the 3 guiding principles of contextualization, curation, and community. And these are very important, because what we're doing is we're taking existing resources or existing description of software and of other things from existing sources. That includes TAPRO, it includes the programming historian, the standardization survival kit, the switchboard, which is one of those cases where Clarine, and Eric for the linguistics, started building this tool several years ago, and as a part of SHOC, it's now being extended to cover also social sciences and broader range of humanities disciplines. Digital humanities conference papers, publications in a classical sense, and of course, the EOS portal marketplace. Our view is that we will be harvesting from all of these sources, but there will be a manual curation flow, which goes back to what I just said earlier with the curation and with the community. There will be people deciding which of the services that we find in the Eosc portal, but also on all of these other sources, are the ones we should really be listing. There may also be questions of deduplication and so on involved in this, but it's mostly on making sure that we're filtering the right services. Because for us, onboarding a service to Eosc and in the sense of listing it in the portal, is very important to make it available generically. But we also think that if you're seeing too many mentionings of, let's say, satellite dishes, that won't get you too far if you're trying to analyze your survey data or your linguistic corpus. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Carsten. I think that was really interesting, and makes me, should we say, from the Eosc core side, where I mostly sit, should we say, more optimistic and cheerful, because it's nice to see that the same concepts are definitely being developed in the cluster communities as well as in the more Eosc core development work. And I think we're all facing certainly the same challenges. Okay, I will switch back to me talking for now. I didn't see any specific questions for Carsten during that time, but please do feel free to use the chat to add any questions you have. Just make sure I can see them as well. Oh, no, I can't. Okay, so back to me. Having had the introduction, having seen where you get to having services and now other resources as well, and I admit I dropped this distinction on Carsten sort of unprepared, but I think clearly he was thinking in the same direction. Now I want to talk about what do we actually have to do to describe these resources and to connect them to Eosc. Obviously, this is the next step. I'm going to give sort of the high level part of this, and then we'll get into more detail in the next two talks. I'll just check on the time as well. So first, there is this resource-centric view, which we've been talking about. I think that it's worth explaining why we get to it, why we talk about something a little bit more than just services. I think we have to accept that there have been at least two, in fact, many more narratives in the community in the past, which we have seen. At one extreme, you find something a bit like everything is fair data. That's the vehicle through which we must access and conceptualize what we do in Eosc. From other sides, everything is a service. And I think that a bit like sort of nature versus nurture in the sciences, both of these are clearly wrong. The answer is inevitably somewhere between the two. And in fact, I think it's more complicated than that. If you start talking to people from the open science community, from OpenAir, they very quickly are going to ask you, well, where did you put publications in this? Is a publication just data, or is it something different? Plus, again, Carsten mentioned when you're talking about whether a service is production ready, having stable software. Well, the software itself is somehow not just a data set, like an experimental data set, but it's something we have to consider. Training, again, also already mentioned, is incredibly important. If we have all these different kinds of entity within Eosc, very quickly we come to the question, how do we deal with them? Do we write separate rules for each kind of entity? Are there training rules of participation and software rules of participation and data rules of participation? Or do we list them in separate portals or catalogs? And for me, all of this, the answer is no, from my point of view at least. In order for Eosc to work, we have to have the greatest commonality we can to be able to offer some added value to the researchers that we're all trying to support. So when SHOC look at dealing with the social sciences and humanities community, I very much imagine if they have someone who's looking for a service which is about somehow annotating text, they would quite like to see software that would go with that service, or conference papers which are potentially linked to that. And in order to make these connections, we have to consider all these things really in a more integrated way. So we are going to have some sort of categorization. I think we have to talk about at least services, research products, by which I would mean data and software and several other things, and training resources. But personally, and I think a lot of what we've been doing in the last year has been putting a layer over the top of these, which we just call resources. And any time that we can make the rules or the procedures or the approach based on all resources rather than the different categories within it, we should. This doesn't mean we don't recognize differences between them. There are things you would ask about for a data set that you certainly wouldn't ask about for a service. Again, as we've heard, services are live things, so they're somewhat intangible. They require people to constantly be performing activities to keep them working. A well-deposited data set that's well annotated and in a good repository could possibly sit there for 10 years untouched and still be very valuable. But if we can find the commonality first, I think that's definitely the way to go. And then we can break down into these categories and even subcategories. There are many kinds of service, data processing perhaps, but a data source, a repository, is a form of service. By which I mean a repository isn't the data in it. The data is contained within it, but the repository offers some level of service, whether it's thin or kind of more complicated and value adding. We often hear about sensitive data services, and there are many, many other categories. These may need subcategory specific rules and approaches, but we can deal with the common parts first. The same is true of research products. We clearly have data sets, publications, software, but there are many other categories. And I think training resources pretty much do merit their own separate section in this as well. Certainly there's the training content, courses themselves, but there's also training syllabuses, quick start guides, architectural documents, standards. There's all sorts of different stuff which we may want to consider within this model. So when we talk about what we're doing within Eosc, I think it's better that we take this point of view of resources. It's certainly built into the Eosc future proposal to some extent. So the next phase of what's running the core of Eosc, pending the negotiation with the European Commission, will, to the extent we can, take this view. And this is what we're trying to do in terms of connecting resources as well. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the vast majority of the effort so far is sitting on the services part of this, because this is what the projects that have contributed to Eosc Portal up to now have focused on. So right now we are connecting essentially services only to Eosc. As I will mention in a little bit, we have plans to expand that more fully to include other kinds of entity, but we're not quite there yet. That work is in progress. So if you want to connect your services to Eosc, what's the sort of very high level view of that? I think this diagram, once I talk you through it, will provide some reasonable information. As ever, this starts with someone making an account somewhere. And this will be mentioned, I think, by George, but from now on, the access method for bringing your provider and your resources to Eosc will start with having to register an account using some sort of AI that works with Eosc. There are many options here, and if you can't find one, we'll try and help you to find one, but that is going to be the first step. And now, rather than just asking people to onboard a resource, we're going to ask them first to onboard a provider. So in order to save quite a lot of effort, which in the past was duplicated with every resource, first you will describe a provider, give a bunch of information about that, and submit that to the Eosc core team, should we say. It will be checked. The information will be checked. Is it kind of basically of decent quality? Also, the appropriateness of providers will be checked. And I'm not going to go into this in detail because it'll be covered later as well, but two checks which I think are worth mentioning. One is, are you trying to sell Louis Vuitton handbags or other counterfeit goods? Because that it does make up a significant portion of the mails which Eosc Portal has received up to now for onboarding in the past. So there are some just straight rejections of kinds of organization that we can't see would ever really be fitting with Eosc. If you're trying to sell jewelry or handbags, chances are you're not really in the area we're talking about. However, another check which goes to the sustainability angle that Carsten mentioned is we will be accepting providers that are legal entities. So we won't be accepting projects as the provider of a service or other resource. That doesn't mean projects can't be accommodated. They will be. Your project affiliation can be listed. This is in the data model, but in order to make sure that things are somewhat sustainable, we will ask that it's legal entities that do this onboarding. And this means that there is a far higher chance we can still contact them 3 to 5 years down the line than a project which inevitably will finish and the contacts may all disappear. So this is one of the steps we're making to try and deal with sustainability. So once a provider has submitted their information and they've been approved, they are able to describe resources. This uses some what previously was unpleasant templates in Google Docs or other systems. Now it's a very nice looking online portal. You're able to describe your resources. Most of the description is quite generic, as I'll mention in a minute. There are some parts which are quite specific to certain kinds of resource, certainly to services. We haven't gone to the service subcategory specific parts yet. Yeah, I think This is also something that can be achieved either by using an online form or via API, and George will talk about this more later. These will then be checked again by the Eosc core team. The way it's set up now, once your provider is approved, we will check your first resource in detail, and it has to be positively approved. After that, you will essentially be able to self-publish, and we will have to check post facto what it is you've uploaded. This is subject to change. This is a somewhat a learning experience for all of us, because it depends on the volume of services and other resources to be connected, which might be very, very high. So we're trying to allow for scaling effectively, but just be aware that this is something which is a little bit subject to change depending on the kind of content that's submitted. But the better content you all submit, the less of a problem this is going to be. And here we will check whether resources match the rules of participation and the inclusion criteria for Eosc, which have been set out. Inclusion criteria I'll point out in a minute. And also, because we want to take resources directly from other communities like SHOC, just since we've been talking about them, we won't be revalidating everything that SHOC is submitting. However, we will be asking them to sign an agreement which says that they will provide a base level of validation that matches our minimum requirements. So we will have a function to essentially audit content which we're automatically taking from other registries to make sure that those agreements are still in place and are being effectively delivered upon. This is really the only way we can see to avoid constant revalidation of resources, which we know won't work. And then the really neat bit, and this is certainly something new, the publication step from this, once a resource is approved, is now much, much easier. It's essentially fully automatic. Things which are approved in this provider portal, in this backend registry, will appear in the Eosc marketplace. There are extra steps which the marketplace team can perform to enable ordering and other added value benefits on top of just being listed. But basically, this is far, far less painful than it used to be and far more instant. So that's the very high level process. I'll let the others go into this in more detail in the subsequent talks. But the only other thing I want to talk about is what is the format with which we request people describe their providers and resources. And these are the so-called Eosc profiles. It's essentially a metadata schema for describing providers and resources. It's already in use now by Eosc Hub, Eosc Enhance, and OpenAir to an extent, although that's still coming online now. And we've essentially mapped the various schemes for describing things that we had in other projects. So in Eosc Hub, in Infra Central as well in the past, and some input from the communities as well, to come up with a consensus schema for describing our services. It's open to others. I mean, it's Creative Commons, and we would hope that this empowers Eosc registries. So it will be used in Eosc Future, which will continue pretty much straight on from what Eosc Hub and Eosc Enhance are doing here. And it's available for the communities as well, like SHOC or Escape or Panosc or any of the other thematic communities or the regional ones as well. We wouldn't necessarily assume they have to use exactly the schema. They're free to, of course, but this allows for them to map to this schema, even if they don't use it, so that translation between them is possible. We would basically focus on the required fields. One thing you'll see is that there are a lot of optional fields in this scheme because we're trying to accommodate many, many different use cases. And that means that there is a base set of data we're always going to need, and that's what I think I would encourage people to focus on. And then the extensions with the optional data is, should we say, lower priority. If you want to see them, there is now, as of a couple of days ago, a provider documentation page on Eosc portal. You can see the link here, eoscportal.eu/providers-documentation. Here there are sections on both the provider and resource profiles. And I've put some tiny URL links for the for a PDF and an Excel of this data if you want to have a look yourself. The PDF is formatted more as a specification, so it's a very long text document. The Excel file is a little easier to manage if you want to have a quick look. I can always pop these back up and put them in the chat later as well. But if you want to have a look, this is where they are. In terms of their structure, they kind of are structured quite similarly. The provider profile has 6 kind of subsections. Basic information, what's the name of the provider, really standard stuff. Information related more to marketing, so explaining who you are to the outside world, logos, use cases, things like this. Classification information, so this is what kind of organization you are, what scientific domain do you serve, are you a physical or a virtual organization? Information about where providers are, how mature they are, where they are in their life cycle, and then there is a large amount of optional additional information as well. This then is the provider profile. So once you've connected your provider, you can use them for as many resources as you like. You can also be associated with resources where you are not the lead provider. This is a function which is very useful for federated services which are being delivered. The resource profile looks very similar. It really has a lot of the same kind of standard information, basic marketing, maturity information, classification. Although here we have both resource location information. Sorry, classification is a little bit wider here because we have the kind of tool we're talking about. There is a difference in how we talk about location, because now we have to talk about the location of the resources which provide a resource and also the geographical area that it seeks to serve. Some resources can only serve some countries or regions. Some of them are European bound, some of them are worldwide. We also have to cover things like language. We talk about dependencies. Do you have to have other resources already accessible in order to use this one? We have contact information, of course. Attribution is interesting. This allows you to be able to cite the project or the funding source which supports a resource, which we know is something that funding agencies are very keen on. And also, obviously, you need to know how to access and order it, and you need to know any financial considerations which are attached to it. In terms of how it looks inside, I don't have time to go through this in great detail, but I'll just give you an example. I don't expect you to read this necessarily on the screen, but if you go to the links from my previous slide, then you'll be able to see yourself. For each field, so this is the basic information section for resources, there is a name for a field, there is an ID, so there's a code which you can use to retrieve it. There are values, there are definitions of what it is. There's a type, so is this a yes, no question? Is this asking for a string? Is this asking for some sort of ID from elsewhere? How many bits of information do we request? For instance, here, we only request one name for a resource, that's fine, but you can have multiple providers because there may be many organizations that contribute to it. We specify whether it's required, as in is this a mandatory field, and whether it would be made public. There is some information which would be requested but not made public. For instance, security contacts in case there's some sort of breach or security incident. This is definitely something we need, but it's not something we need to give to everyone in the world. So this is kind of roughly what the structure looks like. I encourage you to go and look at it yourself. You'll definitely come across it if you try and connect your resources with your providers. And I also want to point out that really of all of this, only one section is probably highly service specific, and that's probably the management information down here. So the rest of it is already, in reflecting and going through it in the last week or so, pretty generic to all kinds of resource. This is something that we are going to have to trim and tweak in future, but I think we've already made a good start in being able to have a profile which covers all resources and then consider what are the additional things we need to ask for specific resource types. Certainly, we don't want you to have to fill in so many fields when onboarding a paper, connecting a paper as a service, but we have to consider just quite how to manage this. And indeed, I think this is pretty much the last thing I want to say. Where does this profile, where's it going? So we've now released version 3. Version 3 is the provider profile and a resource profile, which is focused on general services rather than any particular subtype. So we know this isn't the end of the story. This is a release we had to get out to merge the existing sources of data we had. So it probably has gone through less consultation than you might like as the communities, but we had to get something together first and make sure we could merge the data we had into it. We now certainly definitely will want a lot of feedback on it, and we'll be organizing various channels to get that in the coming weeks and months. I would expect early next year. These dates are not set because these things are still in discussion, but I think it's very realistic. At least the first extension to this schema for data sources. So for data repositories, this is something we're working with OpenAir very closely on to work out what is the delta between what we already have and what they collect on data sources and repositories. So we will start to introduce additional fields, which would be optional because they're not required for all resources. And this would be something like the first quarter of next year, if the work continues at the pace. And then I think you can expect to see in the second half of next year, version 4 of these profiles, where we really break things down more into services, into resource research products, or it's a typo, and into training resources. This is something that we need to do before the end of the Eosc Enhanced project for sure, but it will take a little bit more work. But we definitely want to be in a position that we can be onboarding other kinds of resources as soon as we possibly can. But there are challenges there too. Okay, I'm going to stop there, pretty much on time because Carsten was quite quick. I'm going to pass on now to George Papastephanos, who's going to talk about how you'll actually do this, which I think you'll be happy to see if any of you have experienced the pain that was the previous version of this process. So it's been well reviewed so far. I will check the chat for questions in a moment, although I don't, there are some, but I'll probably have to get to them a little bit later on. For now, I think I'll pass over to George. So George, if you want to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Owen. Let me share my presentation. Give me just. Okay, great. Okay, so hello to all. Hi, everybody. I think you can see my screen now. I can start. Yes, great. So my name is George Papastephanos. I work for Eosc Enhanced from University of Athens. For you that you may not have heard the project, it's a 2-year project that is actually working on contributing to the Eosc portal, to the maintenance and the development of new functionality in the Eosc portal, along with Eosc Hub and OpenAir Advanced. So today I'll just try to provide you an overview to the new provider section of the Eosc portal and the functionality that it will offer to providers, to the user coming from affiliation who would like to provide resources in the portal. What you can do actually, in the current functionality, a user can actually onboard resources in the Eosc portal. It follows this workflow that Owen described before. Also, it can manage and it can have full control on the onboarded resources and the information regarding the provider, and also use the APIs for automatically and programmatically interacting with the catalog of resources. I will provide an overview of these 3 main functionalities, and you can always go in and test yourselves in the link that is visible in the slide. So about the onboarding process, Owen showed that there is a workflow which is followed, which actually is performed within the portal. And we can say that it has 3 distinct phases, 3 distinct steps. The first is that a user who would like to offer resources, onboard resources in the portal, must be registered. Second, must actually provide information about the organization that provides the resources. And at the last step, provide a first template about a resource that will be, let's say, part of its portfolio. These 3 steps, actually are followed, and there is an interaction between the representative and the onboarding team of the Eosc portal. And after these 3 steps, the representative can actually onboard more resources and be part of the Eosc portal catalog. So let's see how these steps are performed within the portal, within the web interface. First of all, the start of this journey is through the Eosc portal. There is a section that asks for providers to visit, and from that point, a provider, a user can click on the Apply Now button. And if it's not, if the provider, the user is not, let's say, logged in, then he or she is redirected to the AAI of the Eosc portal and logs in. The AAI asks for credentials, either academic or social credentials a user can use. When the user logs in, then the next screen is the first screen of the registration forms. What we ask in the beginning is for the representative to, let's say, assert authorization, to verify that she agrees to the Eosc code of conduct, to the Eosc portal privacy policy, and to the authorization of representation of the provider organization, that the user actually is an authorized representative. This is self, let's say, asserted, but actually there is a communication with through emails for the moment, which are sent to users and actually validate that each step has been performed. So the first, after the authorization, the user must fill in information about the provider. These actually forms are based on the new model, on the Eosc profiles, and organize all basic information, all information into categories, into sections. All mandatory fields are denoted with an asterisk, and there is a validation, and there are different validations in the fields, such that users can, let's say, more easily fill in all the necessary information. After all this information is filled in, the submit button is enabled, and the user can go actually to the next step. There are also there is a button and links in the page for users to actually submit a feedback or ask for help, and also there is a mail list, onboarding at Eosc portal, where the user can actually send or contact the team behind this onboarding process.
George, before you go on, we see your presenter view. If you want to switch the view type,
okay,
just makes it bigger for people on small screens. I think you can just hit in the display settings at the top, switch views.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, great. So upon submission, the representative will be navigated to the My Providers page. This is actually a dashboard where a user can see the organization they represent. The organization are organized in the affiliation organized in, let's say, blocks, and the status of the new registration is, let's say, in a pending state, and as we said before, what is pending is actually the onboarding team to validate the information. This is a necessary step for a team to, let's say, validate that this information is according to what Eosc is actually expects. After this step, the onboarding team reviews and approves the provider profile, and this is actually when the last phase, the registration of resources, is enabled. So at each step, as I said before, an email is sent that reminds, let's say, that the next step is available, is open for filling in the resource information. So at this step, the form for registering for filling in information about the resource, again based on the new profile, is enabled. There are two different options. The first actually enables to fill in information through the web form, and the second option is to use the API. Again, the web forms organize all this information on the blocks, on the different blocks on the Eosc profiles. They offer validations for the mandatory fields, for different data formats, and the user can actually submit the information when at least all mandatory fields are filled in. Again, there is the option to save a draft, let's say save the information for filling in the next stage, but still the submission is enabled only when the mandatory fields and all the necessary information is filled in. The review and the approval is again performed by the onboarding team. And after this step, actually the resource and the organization is approved as a valid provider in the Eosc portal, and the information of the resource is available in the marketplace. This is where, let's say, the cycle, this process ends. And the next, let's say, step for the provider, especially when there are more resources to onboard, is to have access to the provider dashboard. The provider dashboard is actually the workspace where the users from the provider can manage their resources. The dashboard is again accessible through the section for providers in the Eosc portal. There is a link in the menu that says my provider, and this link takes the user to the dashboard where more actions are enabled. So the main page of the dashboard is where the user actually sees the status of the provider. As we said before, there are different status, but the more common status is that the provider is approved and can onboard resources. By clicking on the organization, to the provider link, there is the provider dashboard where the user can actually have access to statistics about user statistics or other types of statistics about the resources that are onboarded by this organization, can view in a list all resources, both the resources that are approved and are public in the marketplace, as well as any other draft resources that are, let's say, onboarded, registered, but are not public, can add new resources, can update the provider information, and of course, can actually make some resources not public, on everything that has to do with management of resources. As we said before, there are different statistics about usage, about user views in the marketplace. These statistics can be visualized in maps or in other time series charts. And there is a full control over the list of resources that are provided by this organization. A user can view details about the information that is provided about this resource, can deactivate, make it, let's say, not public, or can also delete and remove from the catalog. For the moment, these are the options, these are the actions that are offered for users in the catalog, for users from the provider. Finally, there is a view on the updates, on the changes, on, let's say, based on the versions. The catalog, let's say, tracks all updates that are performed by users that, let's say, manage the information from a provider. So any user can actually see and have access to this timeline, let's say, about the evolution of a resource in the catalog. So the last thing about the functionality offered to provider has to do with the APIs. The APIs offer, let's say, the programmatic way, the programmatic methods for users to register or access the catalog. As let's say API, actually all API methods are RESTful web services. There is the documentation, and it follows the Open API specifications. And there is the documentation in these links and the providers.eosc.eu/developers. And also there is a mail list that could be, let's say, used for contact for the API issues. So for using the APIs, the first thing is for the representative, the user, to actually onboard and to have an active provider, to have already registered a provider and a resource. We use API tokens, and for that we actually use the AAI functionality for generating tokens that could be used for all methods used by the provider users. And let's see how we can actually obtain an API token. An API token, all this information is documented in the link for the provider API documentation. The user actually must log in and receive a token, which is, let's say, valid for 8 hours. After this expiration, a new one must be obtained. And this token could be used either for test reasons in the documentation page, in the Swagger page that we expose, or in the headers of the methods that we offer. For the API methods, for the moment, there is a simple way to use the API. All API methods are offered through SSL, and the base URL for all API methods is the api.eoscportal.eu. Each method follows this API. For instance, this method that asks for getting all resources within the catalog is API. You can see here the request URL. The format is JSON, but there is the option in the header to ask for other formats like XML. All methods are organized in the two, let's say, main controllers: the information for the provider and for the resource. We have get methods to retrieve information, post methods to create and add information, and put methods to update information. As I said before, all of these, at least the post and put methods, needs the authorized the API token. And as an example, the information, especially for the post and the put methods, are based on the Eosc profiles, the model that is now available, and this is why the version of the API is called API 3.0. So all examples are available in the Open API documentation in Swagger format. As some example you can see here, there is the get provider method returns the Eosc provider profile with a given provider ID. The get resource gets a resource ID and again retrieves the description in JSON format of the specific resource. There is an option to retrieve all the resources in the catalog, to post a new resource, or to update a new provider. For the moment, there is no option to add a new provider. to register a new provider, this option is only possible through the web interface. And the main reason for that is to, let's say, assert and to approve the code of conduct and the privacy policy before registering a new provider. So I will not go into more details about the use of the APIs. This is just an overview. You can take a look. This work is being performed and within the Eosc Enhanced project, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, George. That was very clear. So there is one question in the chat, which is about if you're a software company, what do you have to do? What can you do? Asking about whether you actually have to deploy the service on Eosc. No, in fact, you don't. The resources or other services you connect, you can operate them yourself. I mean, that's the case for most situations. You don't have to use resources from Eosc in order to deploy your own services on top of them, although that is a possibility if you find a provider who's interested in doing that. And the other thing which I think is perhaps more interesting to answer is that the question was, once you've done this connecting, once you've done this onboarding, will there be opportunities to integrate with other complementary services deployed on Eosc? Yes, this is actually a point which maybe I could have made earlier on. This onboarding, this connection of resources is the first step of integration with Eosc and certainly with Eosc Core. So if you go through this process, you will be listed and you will already be using an AI which hopefully is compatible. There are a number of Eosc Core services, things like AI, there's a help desk, monitoring, accounting, various other kind of functionalities and capabilities, which will be available for integration by providers. So you can use or connect to the AI that's there. You can use the monitoring or accounting for services that is there provided by Eosc, and there will be advantages to this. So this is something which will happen. It probably could have happened earlier, but the way the world has worked, everything has been a little bit delayed. Certainly, I think we'll see this much more in Eosc future next year. The deployment question I'll probably leave till later because I want to give Bartosz a chance to talk. However, I will answer one other question. If our repository is already integrated on OpenAir, will we have to still go through this process? I don't know. It depends whether OpenAir actually automatically submit their corpus of resources to us, and I think there is a plan to do so, but we have to go through the technical details. But one really important thing to say, if you already onboarded your resource with Eosc Hub or with the InfraCentral project, it is already there. You will be asked to log in and basically check the data because there's have to be some translation of the data to a new format. So there will probably be some errors, but we have taken a lot of time, particularly our colleagues at JNP have really put in a lot of work here and also at CypherNet to move the data to the new format to the best extent we can, such that this is not a painful process to you, but it will require a check. The other questions I'll, if it's okay, leave until after Bartosz has had a chance to talk in case it answers some of them, but we'll get to them in just a second. So now I shall pass over to Bartosz Wilk from CypherNet, and he'll talk about the more user-facing part of all of this. Thanks, Bartosz.
Thank you, Owen. Let me just display the slides. Okay, I should be able to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Owen. My name is Bartosz Wilk. I represent Academic Computer Center CypherNet at AGH in Krakow. I also represent the projects Eosc Hub and Eosc Enhance, and I am the responsible person for the development of the Eosc marketplace. Taking the opportunity to present you our recent developments in the Eosc marketplace, I will try to show you how we as Eosc community are creating the Eosc and what is the role of the onboarding process, as we are in the onboarding session right now, I will focus on the provider's take on the role of the Eosc marketplace in this process. So let me just start with the short story of the Eosc portal. Sorry, I think I need to turn on the notifications. Okay, I'm free to go right now. Some time ago, we launched the Eosc portal. As you remember, this was the initiative that was brought to us by the European Commission, who advised to launch a website and merge 3 catalogs of Eosc Hub services, eInfra Central and OpenAir services. So we developed an initial architecture and merged three initiatives into a single catalog. Then there was an evolution into the new Eosc portal architecture, and 3 components of this architecture were developed. So the content component being the website, user component being the catalog and marketplace, and the provider component being the main contact point for the providers. Then the Eosc Enhance project started, and the migration of the previously collected service description templates and the provider inputs were happening, and the Eosc onboarding process has been developed as George and Owen have previously described. The final step was to make all this data available to the end users in the Eosc portal, and specifically in the Eosc marketplace. The new version is currently deployed, and you may ask what changed. Actually, the main priority for us was to be ready to answer this question, even though it does not directly come to us. So our priority would be was to create an intuitive user interface that would show the new set of data curated in the resource profile 3.0 to the end users, and make sure that they are aware of how the resource profiles changed, what is the new data that are available and coming from the providers, in order to be sure that our end users are aware of the quality of the data set collected by the onboarding team. We crafted the new presentation layer for the data collected with the provider component, but there were some challenges, specifically handling the metadata quantity, because as you know, as resource providers, there's a large data set collected in the onboarding process, and the variability of this data. So the situation in which some of the data are optional once they are introduced by providers in the onboarding process. At the right side of my slide, you can see the current look of the service or resource presentation page in the Eosc portal, and the pop-up that is shown to the user who enters this layout for the first time. We developed some mini framework that will take the user through the new layout and show exactly how the layout changed and how to access the newly available information, which was made available with the evolution of resource profile. The first step of this mini tutorial will show the evolution of the top section. So we collected all the main information in the top section, making it the main point to look at once you enter the resource presentation page. Then all the categorization and target users and resource availability and supported languages information is collected at the right side of the presentation layout. Then the user is shown with the description and the resource offers provided by the providers. And the next step is to take the users to the newly created details page that will show all the information that is input by the provider during the onboarding process. So as you can see, the journey that starts from the provider component and the user interface that has been already presented by George ends up in the user interface of Marketplace. These 12 categories you can see at the left side in the screenshot of the provider component are translated to the details section in the resource presentation page in the Eosc Marketplace. At the end of this mini guide, we also prepared some way to gather feedback about the new look and the quality of the data provided by service providers. And what I want to emphasize here is that mere software development is nothing in the scope of creating Eosc. The support of Eosc portal is showing the users the information provided by service providers, but the quality of information is something that creates valuable content and valuable service catalog and the basis to create a marketplace. Our main goal here is to make this conversation between service providers and resource providers and resource users available, and we are trying to listen closely to the voice of both sides. One of the feedback mechanisms deployed in this new release version is the final step of this mini guide that I am showing you right now. That will allow also to check the tick if a user wants to be asked about more information in regard to the satisfaction in accessing the resource description. We will take into account feedback about the quality of designs, but we also want to make sure that we are able to determine if the data provided by providers is enough for the users to find out useful information about the service, to determine if the service is usable for the resource is usable for them, and the quality of the information is correct. In the process of user experience modeling that is carried out in the Eosc Enhanced project, we also take other steps to address the end user perspective of the Eosc portal usage. We take user surveys both in the community of Eosc users and Eosc providers. We use other feedback tools as the one presented already by Owen. We have some other tools to monitor how the users interact, and even some tools to present different versions of the user interface to the users in order to find out if they find the information that is needed to evaluate, to discover resources in the most intuitive form. I'll come back to the previous slide. I would like to stress out the fact that we are a community that is created with end users and providers. And personally, I think that something created between these two groups, one providing the resources and other consuming the resources, is something that creates Eosc. We should be able, as Eosc portal developers, to address the perspectives of both in order to make sure that we make the most to support one side reaching the other. And this is our main goal in this whole process. I will come back to this in the conclusions, but I want to present some more features that are made available in this software release we launched before Eosc Expo conference. One thing that you can find out in the Eosc portal that is new is the user profile. So the place where the user can tell the portal, tell the platform about their interests and categories of interests, as well as scientific domains of interest, and sign up to notifications about new relevant services and resources that come to the Eosc portal. That's how we try to animate the engagement of the users to the inclusion of the new resources in the onboarding process. What are the next steps? The next steps will be developing recommendations for the users. These are two versions of the prototype user interface we developed, we designed, and we will find out which one of them is most suitable, running some tests and analytics. But what is the reason? The reason here is to increase resource findability. By suggesting compatible resources, by increasing search accuracy, we are hoping to give the providers a tool to increase the potential to make the resources findable. We want to promote resource value as the way to support an excellent research, as we believe the value of the resource is the driver of the resource market. And I know that market is a complicated term, and maybe controversial in the standpoint of science, but when we have some supply and we have some demand, there's a natural market created, even though that no one buys resources. And we want to increase user satisfaction as the user component developers, as the representatives of the Eosc portal demand side. What are the promotion factors in the recommendations? These might be user interests or used by other users with similar interests, similarity of resources, so information devoted from provider suggestion or classification, and this can be also resource value. So our vision is that Eosc portal should promote resources that present value. And there are inevitable challenges connected with this approach, because we need to know how to measure a resource value. We have some ways to understand what can be a value of resource. We have some rating features, opinions. We will have some favorite functionality. We can analyze popularity of resources, but does it really mean that popular services or resources are valuable? We can try to understand different resource description fields, such as technology readiness level, and try to use it as indicators of resource value. But this is something that is not really obvious. And this is something that, from my perspective, you as resource providers, you as resource users, can help us to understand what creates a value for the resource providers, what are the valuable services, and what are for the resource providers, and what are valuable services for the resource users. And measuring user satisfaction, so satisfying use of resources, and measures strictly connected with the recommendation panels. How satisfactory are the recommendations presented by the Eosc portal? So to wrap up, I would like to end this presentation with the mission of the Eosc marketplace and the view of how we as Eosc community are creating Eosc portal. The role of Eosc marketplace to us is to help creating demand and supply driven environment for pan-European promotion of resources for excellent science. For provider, it is there to help make the resource discoverable, to help fighting information bubbles in pan-European infrastructures, so the users don't stick in their information bubbles and can reach most of the services provided by European Commission at the pan-European level. And with other Eosc core components, our mission is to help providing ready-to-use tools for professional resource delivery. This connects strictly with the service management system, and we as Eosc marketplace developers are hoping to find our role here. And for the end users, the role of the Eosc marketplace is to help in discovery of excellent resources of user interest, finding the valuable and usable information, and helping in accessing them by the end users. So as a summary, I want to add that we will be trying to address all these goals, and there is an inevitable role of providers around the onboarding process in creation of Eosc portal. And I hope to leave this presentation with some incentive to help us create this portal. Thank you.
Thanks, Bartosz. I think we've had quite a complete view of what's going on with the portal now. That was an interesting talk. Particularly, I would pick up right at the kind of near the end of it. This question of quality is, I think, a really difficult but necessary one in terms of how are we going to define quality. It's not for us to determine what every researcher needs, but we want to give them some idea of the benefit of using different resources within Eosc. So this is something that I think is on the table for the next phase of discussion, and not just kind of technical quality measures, but how do we go beyond that? However, we are basically at the end of the time. I didn't see any questions that were unanswered in the chat. There were a couple of questions which I think I tried to answer, and then Mark van der Sanden answered better than I could. If you have any other questions, certainly I think any of us would be happy to receive them by email. Or you can, as I said, use the various feedback mechanisms that are integrated with the Eosc portal. So this new feedback button on the right, or the surveys and the schemes which Bartosz presented as well. On that note, I think unless there's anything any of my fellow panelists would like to say, anything that you guys would like to add? No? I think we can call a halt. It's time for your coffee break before we come back for this next set of breakout sessions. Sorry, the next plenary session after the break, which being about architecture and interoperability is probably also quite related to a lot of the things we talked about here. Okay, thank you very much. See you after the break. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Owen. Bye.